All right, let's move on to our last topic. You talked about the big emerging story just in the last couple months. Feels like nuclear power is becoming a much bigger topic. 5-10 years ago, I don't know if anyone was talking about nuclear power other than maybe can we just decommission more plants. It was just not on the radar at all. And now with the amount of energy required to operate some of this infrastructure for AI, it's needing to come back in a big way. So let's talk a little bit about nuclear power, why it's on your mind, and then let's talk about those the new companies that you're going to be adding to the portfolio.
Yeah, I mean, you said it, nuclear power, it had this boom from 1970 to 1990, and almost no facilities have been built since then. It's almost like saying, oh, what's the big trend for AI? It's paper, right? Like it's something so from the past, it's a little interesting that we're seeing a reversion back to it. But there are very important reasons that this is happening. So as you mentioned, the background is we've seen a wave of nuclear deals. I've got them right here. It's Constellation struck a deal to give 3 Mile Island power supply to Microsoft. Google with the deal with Kairos. They're trying to create small modular nuclear reactors by 2013. Amazon has a deal with a nuclear plant in Pennsylvania. Oracle has talked about using nuclear power. So it's kind of like everybody on the ship. Clearly something important is happening here. And we need to understand why that is and what profit opportunities there might be across the value chain. So what nuclear does, it provides a lot of power density and consistency. And importantly as well, it's clean energy. All of these companies have signed pledges to essentially be carbon neutral. So if you want to spin up a lot of coal power, that is a big time non-starter. They would not be fulfilling the promises they've made. So they need some ability to be able to get this consistent high density power that's clean, and nuclear is one of the easiest ways to fit the bill. So if we're looking at kind of the numbers behind this, let's establish the situation with data centers and what the opportunity is. Right now, data center capacity has been growing at a compounded annual growth rate of about 12 to 15% annually. That's about to spike to 25%. So you see a doubling in that rate of change. 90% of this power growth is going to be driven by AI. Now, globally, data centers will only be about 4.5%. I'm getting these numbers from Semi-Analysis, which they do a lot of really in-depth research and tracking, and they've estimated about 4.5% by 2030, which that sounds very manageable. But here's the problem. Almost all this new power generation is being built in one place. That's the United States of America, and that's where 70% of new power generation is going to happen for this AI boom. Why is that? Well, the average cost of electricity in America is about it's 8 cents per kilowatt hour. In Europe, that number is 18. You go places like Great Britain, it's like 23 cents. So, I mean, the cost to operate one of the, gigascale data centers in the US would be 300 million to 400 million power a year. In a place like the UK, it would be over $1 billion annually. And they're going to have a lot of these. So you can start seeing how much that adds. The only other regions in the world that can, produce power at a scale and cheapness relative to the US is China, which that's a non-starter politically, right? You're not going to keep all your data in China, full stop. Second, the Middle East, which they are starting to build some data centers. But again, you have a political situation where it's like, if we have the cheapest power, most of the companies that are leading AI are in America. And while America's regulatory situation is not perfect, we'll describe that a little bit more later, it's much better than areas like Europe, where getting started on incremental power generation is close to impossible. So add this all up, and here's kind of the bottom line. US power generation from data centers is expected to grow from 4.5% of the total to 14.6 in a 5-year span. This is causing incredible stress on the grid because power generation in the US has been largely flat since 2000. So we go from 20 plus years of no change to all of a sudden a huge step change. Regulatory wise, that's stressing things. It's about 5-year wait to connect new clean energy to the grid. Mm-hmm. We're talking about this jump in 5 years. If you're waiting 5 years, that's impossible. Supply chains, Elon Musk famously said we can't even build enough transformers. There's so many pieces and you know components in power supply to get here. So you can see why this is attractive, because it's an industry that's been largely static and it's about to see this incremental boom. We're always looking for that. Where is there a step change? Where is there an incremental boom? And is it still underestimated by the market? So you look at nuclear power. This is why people have been running to it. It's something that every company is striking a deal with. The problem is this incremental data center demand. It's going to require about 60 gigawatts of new power in the span I've been talking about. So one of those nuclear deals, like the one that Amazon struck, that's 1/100th the need. And then you look at what Google's building, which is the project with Kairos. It's an ambitious target, and they're hoping to get things done by 2030.
Wow.
So the problem with nuclear, right? It takes a long time. The costs are all front loaded. The other problem is the costs are in steel, they're in concrete, they're in labor. Those are all things that generally kind of increase in time and with demand. Whereas the other power sources that are growing, like solar and batteries, they actually have scaling laws to make them cheaper. So if nuclear takes 10 years, you might actually have cheaper alternatives by the time it's ready. So David, I trust you can follow, right? Nothing is simple here, right? Nothing.
Right.
This is a very complex situation at hand.
And then you sprinkle in how people feel about nuclear, and there's a lot of fear, and it doesn't help things.
And then you have that. So I'm looking at the situation. You had asked which stocks are overheated in that last lightning round, and I did say Palantir, but Oklo would be another great one for that answer, because that's Sam Altman's company that I think it went public through a SPAC, and it's nuclear power focused. It was up 150% just a week as some of these deals broke, right? So there's a lot of people chasing enthusiasm, but the picture around whether or not nuclear is actually the majority of the solution, or it's a small amount of the solution to basically power the largest data centers, those are two different issues. So here's what I'm going to focus on today. And I'm going to add two recommendations focused on this. I want to focus on this boom in data centers, all these numbers I've talked about, because data center spending for just the facilities is expected to grow from 49 billion in 2023 to 167 billion in 2026. So that's more than a threefold jump in just a matter of years. You can look at where the spending's going. Roughly half of it's in power systems, up to a third of it's in cooling systems, and the rest is, miscellaneous stuff. So one of our key themes that we've talked about, one of our trends for 2025, is the growth of Blackwell. Well, this is the new chip from NVIDIA. One of the features of it is incredibly power hungry, and the NVIDIA chips are just going to get more power hungry. So that has, a power outcome. It also means that if you put these chips too close together, they will essentially cook each other, right?
Yep.
You will lose it. So you need to have advanced cooling strategies. So the company that we're going to add first is Vertiv. David, this is a company you own in your own portfolio. It's one I've looked at. It's ticker symbol VRT. They have a very wide portfolio of power supplies, things like switch gears, basically the power systems to make sure that these data centers get continuous power. But they've made a significant investment in cooling systems, and this is pretty advanced technology. You're actually taking the cooling systems to the chip itself, a plate above it to dissipate all the heat. So they have this. It is now essential technology, largely thanks to the growth of where NVIDIA is driving the market. And what this is going to do, they can command higher margins on this because it's very complex technology. And also, as these companies, Microsoft's going from like 180 data centers to 900 in this 5-year stretch. As these companies are looking how they get to market faster, how they build faster, companies with this design and build expertise like Vertiv that have been building it for years, now they get to apply this all into a window of intense demand. So I love the competitive positioning of Vertiv. I love how their products fit. I love their ability to drive margins. I love their executive team. They're led by the former CEO of Honeywell, who's kind of legendary in this industrials market. He has a big vision for the company. On a trailing basis, they look expensive, but if you look to forward earnings, I have them at around 30 times forward earnings. And then as we've talked about, we can see the data center projections that these companies have made. I think there's going to be a lot of incremental spending for Vertiv, not just in that 2025, but into the uncertain years we've talked about, 2026, 2027, 2028. So I like their ability to continue growing earnings. It's a company that's run up a lot, but I think, could this see another double in the years to come? Yeah, I definitely see the potential there. The other stock I'll be adding to this is Schneider Electric, and there's no rocket science to this. They are just Vertiv's number one competitor. They've got a little bit wider portfolio in some of the power equipment. They did a major acquisition to get more cooling, and I just see them kind of as the two top dogs. And I want the two top dogs in this kind of growth rate. So, David, I know that was a lot. We almost need a PowerPoint to break this all down. But the key theme here is we walk through, whenever I'm looking for a new aspect of the trend, I want to break it down from its most foundational levels, because I think, getting the trend right is probably more important than the specifics of the individual stocks. So we've really framed this trend, why we like, as kind of a first play, this infrastructure equipment. We've picked out our two companies. And if we want to go back in the future and we want to add, a nuclear play or something like that, we can, but we've gotten kind of those foundational and structural winners, and we can add more across them now that we've kind of established this opportunity.
Would you say a theme that you're seeing out there is these companies are making huge investments in Blackwell? We talked about the price of Blackwell is up considerably from what prior generation chips were. Right now, the ability and its abilities are much greater too. So that's why they can command a higher price point. Do you see these kind of supporting plays as, hey, these companies are investing so much in the chips, you might as well also invest in making sure you get the most out of the chips, so they run, so you don't have issues? Is that kind of a way to think about it? Is they're making such large investments in these data centers that, of course, you're going to kind of add on these incremental things to get the most out of your data center. It almost makes you think about, you're redoing your kitchen. It's a huge expense. And it's like, oh, do you want to add in this nice lighting? And it's not a huge cost, but it'll make your kitchen a lot better. Is that a way to think about it? That they cost less for the companies, but they help the overall output so much that it's just a no-brainer to continue to invest in them?
100%. Meta was almost finished with some complexes of data centers. They bulldozed them and rebuilt them because they wanted better power supplies. They wanted the ability to do a lot of this, advanced cooling. It is table stakes that if you're going for an AI data center, you need to go and do this, because you said having failures in, these huge training clusters, that incredible amount of cost. You're not seeing great utilization on your chips. You're spending so much on your chips. You need to do everything possible to get your utilization as high as possible. That's what we've talked about with networking. It's what we're talking about with infrastructure. So I think that's a perfect way of framing this up. If you're going to make this big investment, you're going to see incredible ROI from doing these surrounding areas well, whether it's networking or whether it's actually getting, your power supply, built. It's not just about, with cooling, it's not necessarily just about reducing electricity costs. I mean, that's part of the equation, but again, it's about ensuring that you're not seeing high chip failures that not only cost you on the chip side, but again, might ruin training runs that are incredibly expensive in terms of, amortizing the cost of your chips. So I think there's every incentive in the world, as long as they're spending on these chips, to also spend in these markets as well.
All right, great. So those are the two companies. And can you give us the